Welcome to our channel, English Avenue. Today, we are about to take you on a journey that is not only inspiring but also luxurious. A journey that starts with a dream, grows with vision, and becomes a symbol of success, class, and perfection. Today's story is about one of the most iconic names in the world, Rolex. Now you might have heard this before. When I become rich, I will buy a Rolex. But have you ever wondered, why Rolex? Why not just any other watch? What makes Rolex so special? Why is it so expensive? Why do successful people want to wear it? And why is it not just a watch, but a symbol of something much bigger? Because the truth is, Rolex is not just a watch. It's a story. It's a dream. It's an emotion. It is not worn to show time. It is worn to show that your time has come. We will explore every detail. Why Rolex is so expensive. Why Rolex is considered a powerful investment. Why it's limited. And why people connect it with success and wealth. Most importantly, how Rolex started from zero and became the most respected watch brand in the world. You will not only improve your English with this story, but you'll also get inspired, motivated, and emotionally attached to a journey that started more than a century ago. Let's go back to the year 1881. In a small town called Kulmbach in Germany, a baby boy was born. His name was Hans Wilsdorf. Now, Hans was not born into a rich family. In fact, life was very hard for him from the very beginning. When Hans was just 12 years old, something very painful happened. He lost both of his parents. Yes, he became an orphan at the age of 12. He had no mother to hug him, no father to guide him. Just a young boy left alone in the world. He was sent to a boarding school in Switzerland, and there, his life started changing slowly. He was very intelligent, curious, and disciplined. But more than anything, he was a dreamer. He used to look at the sky and think, one day I will do something big, something that the whole world will remember. When Hans was about 19 years old, he started working in a watch company in Switzerland. This company didn't make watches, but they exported watches to other countries. So Hans was learning everything. How watches are made. What makes a watch good or bad? Why people prefer some brands over others? How to pack watches. How to deal with customers. He was learning the business of time, minute by minute. Now let me ask you a question. Have you ever worked a job that was small but you gave your 100%? That was Hans. He was not the boss. He was not rich. But he worked like a king. He respected time. He respected work. And slowly, that work started respecting him back. Now let's fast forward a few years. Hans moved to London in 1903. He was still young, just 22 years old. But now he had a big dream in his heart. He wanted to create a watch brand that was different. He didn't want to make just another watch. He wanted to make the most trusted, most respected watch in the world. In 1905, Hans Wilsdorf, along with his partner Alfred Davis, started a company called Wilsdorf and Davis in London. This was the beginning, the very first step. They were not even making watches at first. They were importing watch movements, the inner parts, from Switzerland, putting them in strong, elegant cases and selling them in London. They wanted to give people high-quality watches at reasonable prices. And slowly, people started to notice their products. But Hans was not satisfied. He wanted something bigger. He wanted a name that was easy to say, easy to remember, and that sounded elegant in every language. He tried hundreds of names. Some were too long, some too hard to pronounce. But then, one day, in 1908, he was riding in a horse carriage when suddenly the name came to him like a whisper. Rolex. Yes, just 5 letters. Short, strong, stylish. He said it again, Rolex. It sounded like a watch ticking. It sounded powerful. It was perfect. And in that moment, in that simple horse carriage, a legend was born. Rolex. In 1908, Hans officially registered the name Rolex in Switzerland. And that was the real beginning of a brand that would change history. But in the beginning, things were not easy. Hans wanted to make a watch that people could wear on their wrist. Now you might say, what's so new in that? Everyone wears wristwatches today. But in the early 1900s, most men used pocket watches. Wristwatches were considered feminine, for women. Men used to carry watches in their coat pockets. They would pull the watch out of their waistcoat, look at the time, and then tuck it back in. It was considered proper, formal, and masculine. Wristwatches were considered weak, girlish, and not reliable. But Hans Wilsdorf saw something no one else could see. He saw the future. A time where people would want convenience. A time where people would want a watch on their wrist, always visible, always accessible. But he also knew one thing very clearly. If he wanted men to accept wristwatches, the watch had to be perfect. Not just stylish, not just small. It had to be accurate, durable, and strong enough to handle the roughness of a man's daily life. Now, making such a wristwatch was not easy. The technology in 1908 was not very advanced. Most wristwatches lost time. Some gained time. A few stopped working after exposure to water or dust. And Hans didn't want just another watch. He wanted to create something that people could trust with their life. So he started working with the best Swiss watchmakers. He began building wristwatches that were not only beautiful, but extremely precise. Every single gear, every spring, every little screw inside the Rolex watch was designed with care, patience, and passion. Hans would spend days testing the watches, checking how they worked in different temperatures, in humidity, in rough weather. He was obsessed with perfection. Then came one of the biggest moments in his journey. It was the year 1910. Hans Wilsdorf sent one of his Rolex wristwatches to the Swiss office for chronometer certification. This office tested watches for accuracy. At that time, only large marine chronometers used in ships would pass those tests. No small wristwatch had ever received that certificate. People said wristwatches could never be accurate enough. But Hans believed otherwise. After weeks of testing, the Swiss authorities were shocked. This small Rolex wristwatch was extremely accurate. For the first time in history, a wristwatch received the Swiss Certificate of Chronometric Precision. It was a huge victory for Hans Wilsdorf. It proved that his dream was not foolish. It was possible. But just when Hans Wilsdorf was climbing toward success, the world took a dark turn. In 1914, World War I broke out. This war didn't just affect countries, it affected people's trust, emotions, and businesses. Hans, being German, was suddenly seen as a foreign enemy in England, even though he had worked so hard there. Many English customers stopped trusting German companies. They didn't know Hans's heart. They didn't care that he believed in quality, honesty, and innovation. They only saw his passport. For the safety of his company and his dream, Hans made a bold decision. He moved Rolex from England to Switzerland, a country that stayed neutral during the war. It was heartbreaking to leave behind the place where his dream had grown. But it was necessary to protect the future of Rolex. In the same year, 1914, after moving to Switzerland to protect his dream during World War I, Hans didn't stop. He quickly set up a new base for Rolex there, using Switzerland's reputation for watchmaking excellence. And despite the war, he sent another Rolex wristwatch to the Kew Observatory in England. This place tested timepieces for the Royal Navy, and their standards were even tougher. They would test watches in 5 different positions, in different temperatures, over many days. Everyone believed a small wristwatch could never pass. But again, Hans Wilsdorf shocked the world. The Rolex wristwatch received a Class A precision certificate, something only marine chronometers had received before. This moment was historical. Rolex was now officially the most accurate wristwatch in the world. People started noticing. The world started paying attention. But now came the next challenge. Hans knew that precision alone was not enough. A man's wristwatch needed to survive daily wear. It had to handle dust, sweat, rain, accidental splashes, and maybe even a fall into water. Most watches at that time would stop working if even a small amount of moisture got inside. Hans Wilsdorf wanted to solve that. He wanted to make the world's first waterproof wristwatch. So he began working with engineers, watchmakers, and inventors to design a case that could seal the watch tightly. After many failed attempts, many sleepless nights, and many experiments, something incredible happened. In the year 1926, Rolex created the world's first waterproof and dustproof wristwatch. It was named the Rolex Oyster. Now imagine this watch. It had a special case that locked tightly like an oyster shell. That's why they named it Oyster. It protected the movement inside from water and dust. It had a screw-down crown, a hermetically sealed case, and a revolutionary design that had never been seen before. But even now, people were doubtful. They didn't believe it was truly waterproof. Hans needed to do something bold to prove it. Something unforgettable. In 1927, a young Englishwoman named Mercedes Gleitze decided to swim across the English Channel. The English Channel is a long stretch of cold, rough water between England and France. It takes hours to cross it by swimming. It's dangerous. Most people never make it. But Mercedes was brave, determined, and ready. Hans saw this as a golden opportunity. He gave her a Rolex Oyster watch and asked her to wear it during her swim. People laughed. They said, "The watch will die before she does." But Hans said nothing. He just waited. Mercedes entered the freezing waters. She swam for more than 10 hours. The Rolex Oyster stayed on her wrist the entire time. And when she came out, shivering, exhausted, the first thing Hans did was check the watch. It was still working perfectly. Not even a single drop of water had entered the case. This event became famous around the world. Newspapers printed headlines like, "The watch that defied the sea." And Hans Wilsdorf made sure that everyone saw it. He placed large ads in the front pages of top newspapers, showing the Rolex Oyster and the story of Mercedes Gleitze. People were shocked, amazed, curious. Now Rolex was no longer just a watch. It was a marvel of engineering, a proof of reliability, and a symbol of courage, endurance, and innovation. From that moment, Rolex started becoming more than just a product. It became a lifestyle, a dream, a status symbol. People started saying, "If you want to show success, wear a Rolex." But Hans was still not done. He had another dream: to create a watch that winds itself. You see, most mechanical watches at that time had to be wound manually every day. You had to take the crown, twist it, and wind it to keep it running. If you forgot to wind it, the watch would stop. Hans wanted to eliminate that problem. He wanted to create a watch that winds itself with the motion of the wrist. And in 1931, Rolex introduced the world's first self-winding mechanism with a perpetual rotor. This was a game changer. The watch now used the natural movement of your wrist to stay wound. No need to twist, no need to remember, just wear it, and it keeps going. This innovation became the foundation of modern automatic watches. Rolex didn't just change the market, they shaped the future. By this time, Rolex was not just a brand, it was a revolution. A revolution started by an orphan boy who lost everything but never lost faith in time. In 1939, World War II began, and the world was again full of fear, pain, and destruction. Even though Switzerland stayed neutral, Hans Wilsdorf could feel the suffering all around him. Many of his customers and employees were from countries now fighting each other. And then something amazing happened. British soldiers who were captured and made prisoners in German camps had lost everything, even their watches. But Hans did something truly inspirational. He said, "If you are in prison and want a Rolex, I'll send it. Don't worry about the money now. Pay me later, when you're free." More than 3,000 prisoners received Rolex watches. Hans didn't do it for profit. He did it to give them hope. He believed, even in the darkest place, time and dignity matter. It was not a business move. It was a human move. And because of that, Rolex became more than a brand. It became a symbol of courage, trust, and humanity. After the success of the Oyster and the invention of the perpetual self-winding movement, Rolex had already started to rise above its competition. But Hans Wilsdorf wanted more than just to sell watches. He wanted to prove, again and again, that Rolex was a watch of achievement, of pushing boundaries, of going where no one else had gone. He knew that his watches were strong, accurate, waterproof, and self-winding. But how could he show the world that they were also unstoppable? This is when Hans began a powerful idea. He believed that the best way to test a watch was to take it into the most extreme places on Earth. Deep oceans, high mountains, freezing temperatures, blazing deserts. If a Rolex could survive those places, then it could survive anywhere. And more than survive, it could shine. So Rolex watches began to go on incredible adventures, not as decorations, but as trusted tools. Let's start with one of the most iconic journeys in human history. In the early 1950s, a team of brave climbers decided to do something that had never been done before: reach the summit of Mount Everest. This was the tallest mountain in the world, standing at 8,848 meters, 29,029 feet, above sea level. It was cold, dangerous, and deadly. Many climbers had died trying to reach the top. The two climbers who finally made it to the top on May 29, 1953, were Sir Edmund Hillary from New Zealand and Tenzing Norgay, a Sherpa from Nepal. They faced freezing temperatures, lack of oxygen, strong winds, and deadly slopes. But guess what? On their wrist, they wore a Rolex Oyster Perpetual Explorer. The watch didn't stop. It didn't freeze. It kept ticking. As the two men planted their feet on the top of the world, the Rolex was ticking with them, beating with human triumph. This was not just an advertisement. This was a message to the world. Rolex is not afraid of any height. After this event, Rolex created a special model to honor the mission. It was called the Rolex Explorer. It was made especially for adventurers and extreme explorers. It had a clear, readable dial, strong, luminous hands, and a tough case. It was simple, bold, and powerful, just like the people who wore it. While Rolex was climbing mountains, it also had its eyes on the deep sea. During the 1950s, more and more people began exploring the ocean depths. Scientists, divers, and military men wanted watches that could go underwater for long periods and still keep perfect time. So Rolex started working on a new mission: to create a professional diver's watch. And in 1953, the same year Everest was conquered, Rolex launched the legendary Rolex Submariner. It was the world's first wristwatch to be waterproof to a depth of 100 meters, 330 feet. This was a huge deal. Most watches would die in a swimming pool. The Submariner could survive a deep dive. But Rolex didn't stop at 100 meters. They kept improving the design: stronger seals, more resistant cases, and eventually Rolex created even more advanced diving watches like the Sea Dweller and the Deep Sea that could survive depths of up to 3,900 meters, 12,800 feet. The Submariner wasn't just technical, it was beautiful. The black dial, the rotating bezel, the luminous hour markers, it became an icon of style. Movie characters like James Bond wore the Rolex Submariner, starting with Sean Connery in Dr. No, 1962. It became the watch of gentlemen, divers, and heroes. Today, the Submariner is one of the most desired watches on the planet. Now let's go from the deep ocean to the world of racing. In the 1960s, Rolex turned its attention to car lovers and speed enthusiasts. Drivers needed watches with chronographs, functions that allowed them to measure time accurately while racing. In 1963, Rolex launched the Cosmograph Daytona, a watch built for professional racing drivers. The watch was named after Daytona Beach in Florida, USA, a famous place for car racing. The Daytona had a beautiful design, strong durability, and a tachymeter scale on the bezel to measure speed. It was precise and bold, but in the beginning, it didn't sell very well. People didn't understand it. For years, the Daytona remained in the background. But then something magical happened. The famous Hollywood actor Paul Newman was a race car driver in real life. He started wearing a Rolex Daytona, and the world noticed. His personal Daytona became so famous that in 2017, it was sold at an auction for $17.8 million, making it one of the most expensive watches ever sold. Today, the Rolex Daytona is one of the most wanted watches in the world. It stands for speed, elegance, and legacy. Rolex wasn't just for climbers and divers. It was also becoming the watch of leaders, kings, presidents, and visionaries. In 1956, Rolex launched the Day-Date, a very special watch. It was the first watch in history to display both the date and the day of the week, written in full on the dial. This may sound normal today, but in 1956, it was revolutionary. This watch was luxurious. It was made only in 18-karat gold or platinum. It had a special bracelet called the President Bracelet, designed only for this model. Over time, many world leaders and presidents wore this watch, including U.S. presidents like Lyndon B. Johnson. That's why the Day-Date became known as the President's Watch. It was not just a timepiece. It was a symbol of power, respect, and elegance. Now here comes one of the most mind-blowing achievements in Rolex history. In 1960, a deep-sea submersible named Trieste went down to the deepest part of the ocean, the Mariana Trench, about 10,916 meters, 35,814 feet below the surface. That's deeper than Mount Everest is tall. Rolex created a special experimental watch called the Rolex Deep Sea Special. They attached it to the outside of the sub. The pressure at that depth is crushing, over 1,000 times more than at sea level. No normal object can survive. But after the Trieste returned, the Rolex Deep Sea Special was still working, perfectly. Not broken, not delayed, just ticking like nothing had happened. And again, it survived the deepest place on Earth. That's the power of Rolex. It was not just a name now. It was a symbol. Of what? Of perfection, luxury, trust, accuracy, and class. But this is where most people make a mistake. They think Rolex's journey was over after it became famous. No, the truth is, Rolex's real battle started after becoming famous. Why? Because now, the world was watching. Every luxury brand of the world had their eyes on Rolex. Every company wanted to copy them. Every critic waited for them to make a mistake. Hans Wilsdorf had one clear rule in his mind. A Rolex watch should not only look perfect, it must function perfectly even in the toughest conditions. That's why Rolex was not just creating beautiful watches. They were building machines, tools, survivors. Let's break down the philosophy behind the scenes. Timeless design. Rolex didn't chase trends. In fact, some of their most famous models, the Submariner, the Datejust, the Day-Date, haven't changed their look for decades. Why? Because classic beauty never goes out of style. Unmatched durability. Each Rolex watch is built like a tank. They test the watch under extreme pressure, heat, water, and dust. Some watches are tested in destruction chambers. Yes, Rolex destroys hundreds of watches every year just to check their limits. In-house everything. Most watch brands buy parts from outside suppliers. Rolex doesn't. They make everything in-house. From the gold they melt, to the screws inside the movement, to the special lubricants used inside the gears. This gives them complete control over quality. Silent mastery. Rolex doesn't shout. It doesn't do crazy marketing stunts. It doesn't need celebrities to beg for attention. In fact, Rolex quietly supports science, art, exploration, and deep-sea diving. It believes in action, not noise. So, what made Rolex the luxury status symbol? The answer is simple. Exclusivity, quality, and emotional power. People don't just buy Rolex because of timekeeping. They buy it because of what it represents. Let's talk about things that only the most curious minds ever discover. Why you can't buy a Rolex just because you have money. Why Rolex is the only watch in the world that becomes more expensive over time. Why billionaires, kings, rappers, scientists, and divers all love the same brand. And how Rolex remains untouchable, even in the modern world of smartwatches and fast fashion. Most people think, if I had $10,000, I can walk into a Rolex showroom and buy one. Wrong. Let's say you walk into a Rolex store tomorrow with full cash. You ask, I want a Submariner. They'll smile and say politely, Sorry, sir, madam, there's a waiting list. Would you like to join? Now your mind explodes. What? Waiting list for a watch? Yes. And the waiting time? Sometimes 2 years, 3 years, or even 5 years, just to get one watch. Why? Because Rolex doesn't care about fast selling. They care about long-term value. They care about who's wearing their watches. They want the right people to wear Rolex, not just rich people, but true lovers of excellence. Rolex is like an exclusive club. Money is not the only key. You need patience, reputation, loyalty, and sometimes luck. Material quality. Rolex uses a special type of stainless steel called 904L steel. It's harder, shinier, and more corrosion-resistant than regular steel. It's difficult to work with, but Rolex doesn't compromise. Handmade movements. Every Rolex movement takes months to make, not because it's slow, but because it's so precise. Every gear, every spring is assembled by hand, checked, and rechecked. Years of testing. Rolex doesn't release a watch after it's made. They test it under extreme conditions for years before allowing it to enter the market. That's why their watches last for decades. Research and innovation. Rolex has entire buildings only for research. They have in-house labs where scientists study metals, crystals, lubricants, and even watchmaking robots. This costs millions, but it keeps Rolex ahead. Now here's something shocking. Rolex is one of the most loved brands on earth. People are begging to buy them. Every single day, people search online, visit stores, and call dealers. But do you know how many watches Rolex makes per year? Only around 1 million. Now you might say, that sounds like a lot. But it's not. Let me show you why. Compare it with Apple. Apple makes over 200 million iPhones every year. So if 200 million people want iPhones, they can get one. But if 10 million people want a Rolex, only 1 million will get it. 9 million people walk away disappointed. That's why the demand is higher than the supply. And when something is rare, it becomes more valuable. This is what makes Rolex so powerful. Even after over 100 years, it's still hard to get. Now imagine this. Let's say you buy a Rolex today for $7,000. And after 3 years, someone offers you $10,000 for it. Why? Because they don't want to wait 3 years on the list. They're ready to pay extra. That's why Rolex is not just a luxury. It's an investment. Just like gold, diamonds, or land, Rolex watches increase in value. Some rare Rolexes, like the Paul Newman Daytona, were sold for over $17 million at auction. Yes, you read that right. $17 million for one watch. So when people wear a Rolex, they are not just wearing a fashion item. They are wearing money, history, art, and investment on their wrist. Now let's talk about emotions. Why do people cry when they get their first Rolex? Because for many people, Rolex is a dream, a goal, a reward. It's not just a gift. It's a symbol of something big. A man buys his first Rolex after working 20 years in a foreign country. A woman gifts herself a Rolex after surviving a painful divorce and starting a new business. A son gives his father a Rolex on his retirement day with tears in his eyes. A wife surprises her husband with a Rolex on their 25th anniversary, hiding it under his pillow. It's not just time, it's love, it's respect, it's achievement. That's why Rolex is passed from one generation to another, from father to son, from mother to daughter. It's not just a watch, it's a family legacy. There's a secret world of Rolex collectors. These people don't buy watches to wear them every day. They buy, store, protect, and admire them, like people collect art or coins. They know which model was released in which year, which dial color is the rarest, which serial numbers are most valuable, which watch was worn by which celebrity. For them, every Rolex tells a story. Some collectors spend their entire lives hunting for that one rare piece. Rolex appears everywhere, silently, powerfully. In movies like James Bond, Titanic, Rain Man, Rolex is always on the wrist of powerful characters. In songs by Drake, Jay-Z, Eminem, Kanye, Rolex is mentioned as a mark of success. In sports, Rolex is worn by champions like Roger Federer, Tiger Woods, Tom Brady. But remember, Rolex never pays celebrities to wear their watches. These people choose Rolex because it matches their achievement, their style, their class. Now you may ask, will Rolex survive in the future world of smartwatches and technology? The answer is yes, absolutely. 100%. Because Rolex is not competing with smartwatches. Rolex is not here to give you heart rate or step count. Rolex gives you soul. A smartwatch is like fast food. A Rolex is like a candlelit dinner at a fine restaurant. In the future, people will wear smartwatches for data and Rolex for pride. You might be surprised to know that Rolex is not a normal luxury brand. It's not owned by a rich family or shareholders. Rolex is owned by the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation, a non-profit charity. Yes, you heard that right. The profits from Rolex go into supporting scientific research, education, and arts around the world. Rolex doesn't have a loud CEO on Instagram. It doesn't shout, "Buy me," every second. It works quietly, lets its watches do the talking. That's why when someone wears a Rolex, they are not showing off money. They're showing off taste, success, history, and purpose. As of 2025, Rolex is worth over $11 billion, making it the most valuable luxury watch brand in the world. It's not just a watch company. It's a global symbol of success, power, and timeless prestige. In 1960, Hans Wilsdorf took his last breath. He passed away at the age of 79 in Switzerland. But his dream didn't die. His vision, his values, his watches, they all lived on. Today, every time someone wears a Rolex, they wear a piece of history, a symbol of love, dedication, and true success. And that was the unforgettable journey of Rolex, from a small dream born in the heart of Hans Wilsdorf, to becoming a symbol of success, discipline, and timeless excellence. Rolex is not just a watch, it's a mindset. What can we learn from this story? If you have a vision, protect it. If people laugh at your dreams, believe even more. If success takes time, be patient, because the world only respects what is rare, real, and relentless. Just like Rolex. Rolex teaches us that quality will always win over quantity. That success is not about shouting. It's about silence that speaks louder than words. It's about doing your work so perfectly that one day people will wait for years just to get what you made. So never give up. Even if the world doesn't see your worth now, you keep building. Because when the time is right, the world will watch you the way they watch Rolex, with respect, admiration, and desire. If you loved this story and want to feel inspired again, go watch the Louis Vuitton success story on our channel. That's another unbelievable journey from poverty to power. You won't want to miss it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real stories that teach, touch, and transform. See you tomorrow. Stay hungry, stay humble, and always remember, your time will come.